Hi friends, continuing to the chapter, the psychology, observational learning. In both classical and the instrumental conditions, approaches to the attitude formation. The person has to direct get in touch with or the experiences as in the case of status experiments with the attitudinal object. Though it is also true that the people may acquire attitudes simply through observing the rewards and punishment that the others get for their exposure of their attitudes. The phenomenon through which a person acquires a new form of behavior or tough simply through observing the others in describing the observational learning. For instance, you might develop a negative attitude towards the college canteen if you saw someone throwing up after having a meal there, although your friend's newly formed dislike is due to the instrumental condition of your negative attitudes as a result of an observational learnings. The rationales behind the commercial of, say, Pizza Hut, which shows someone's ordering and obviously enjoying a pizza, is that the viewer will also form a positive attitude vicariously and initiate such behavior in the future. Social learn through the imitations. A crucial source of our attitude is that the action of the other people around us. For the child, the parents are a powerful influence. Involving the kids of learning, classical conditioning, instrumental conditioning, and observational learning. Although the attitude held by the parents and the children are not usually highly correlated, there are some expectations. One study reported correlations between the children's political preference and the choices of the religions one had and those of their parents. The mass media, as particular television, have a major influences on the people's attitude and those of their children. Especially so when the attitudes are not strongly held. Communication scientific Stephen Chaffee found that before age 7, American children get most of their political information from the TV. An extensive statistic analysis of changes in the American racial attitudes over the last half century found that the media coverage does more than reflect the public opinion. It has helped mold it out. Long periods of liberalization have been followed by the period of an conversation, and these are the eras have responded to the cues in the American media. The impact of a commercial on the children's attitude has also been investigated and reported that the two-thirds of the group of children who saw a circus strongman eat a cereal believed it would make them the strong too. These findings are of particular concern in the light of a murders sometimes committed by the young children and carried out in a way similar to those portrayed in the certain films. The term attitude refers to a relatively enduring evolution of an attitude object. Our attitudes are inherited and also learned through the direct and indirect experiences with the attitude objects. Some attitudes are more likely to be based on the beliefs, some more likely to be based on the feeling, and some more likely to be based on the behaviors. Strong attitudes are important in the sense that we hold them with a confidence, we do not change them very much, and we use them frequently to guide our actions. Although there is a general constancy between the attitude and the behavior, the relationship is stronger in some situations than in the others. For some measurements than for the others, and for some people than for others. Motivation. It is a process of an internal stage which urges to behave in a certain way to achieve a goal to satisfy the desire or the needs. Biogenetic motives. These are the motives which are connected with the organizations such as air, water, hunger, temperature, sex, and pain. Sociogenetic motives. These are the motives which are the results of the social effects such as power, achievement, status, and security. It is also called as secondary motives. Attitudes are lead lines to respond in a favorable or unfavorable manner to a particular object or a scale or the objects. Class conditioning. When a neutral stimulus repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus brings a natural untrained responses. Observing learning. The phenomenon through which a person acquires a new form of a behavior or simply through observing the others is described observational learning. Instrumental conditioning. It is also called operational learning. It is used as either reinforcement or punishment to increase or decrease the probability of behaviors to occur more gain. Attitude change. In the previous chapters, we studied about the attitude formation through learning of different conditioning. Conjunctive diagnosis is an internal stage which occurs when there is an inconstituent between one attitude and the other attitude or behavior. This lesson discusses about how our behavior is affected by attitude, conjunctive dissonance, and how the marketer make us the principles of dissonance. Outline the principles of an self-preservation and explain how they can account for the influences of a behavior on the attitudes. Outline the principles of the conjunctive diagnosis and explain how they can account for the influences of behavior on attitudes. Plan of the studies. Changing attitudes by changing the behaviors. It might not be surprised you to hear that we can often predict the people's behavior if we know their thoughts and their feelings about the attitude objects. You might be surprised to find out our action also have influences on our thoughts and feelings. For example, it makes sense that if I like a strawberry jam, I will buy it because my thoughts and feelings about a product influences my behavior. But will my attitude towards the orange or the mandely becomes more positive if I decide for whatever the reason to buy it instead of jam? It turns out that if we engage in a behavior and particularly one that we have not expected that we would have, although and feelings towards the behavior are likely to change. This might not seem intuitive, but it represents another example of how the principles of the social psychology is in the case. The principle of the attitude constituency led us to make a prediction that wouldn't otherwise be that obvious. Say for an example, imagine that one Tuesday evening in the middle of a semester, you see your friend Ram. He just finished his dinner and tells you that he is planning to head home to study and work on a term paper. When you see him the next day, however, he seems a bit shaken. It turns out that instead of going home to study, Ram spent the entire evening listening to the music at a music club in the town. He says that he had a great time, stayed up late to watch the last set and didn't get home until dawn. And he spoke up so late this morning and he missed his first two classes. You might imagine that the Ram might be feeling some uncertainty and perhaps some regrets about his unexpected behaviors the night before. Although he knows that it is important to study and to his classes on the time. He nevertheless realizes that, at least in this case, he neglects his schoolwork in favor of another activity. Ram seems to be wondering why he has, who knows how important school is, engaged in his behavior after he promised himself that he was going to home to study. Let's see if we can use the principles of an attitude constituency to help us understand how Ram might respond to his unconditional, unexpected behavior and how his attitude towards the listening to the music and study might follow from him. Self perceptions involves inferring our beliefs from our behaviors. People have an avid interest in understanding the cases of behavior, both they and others, and doing so help us meet the important goals of other concern and the self-concern. If we can better understand how and why other people around us act the way they do, then we will have a better chance of avoiding the harm from others and better chance of getting those other people to cooperate with and like us. And if we have a better idea of understanding the causes of our own behavior, we can better work to keep that behavior in a line with our preferred plans and goals. In some cases, people may be sure about their attitudes toward the different attitude objects. Say for an example, perhaps Ram is a bit unsure about his attitudes towards the schoolwork versus listening to the music, and this uncertainty certainly seems to be increasing in the light of his recent behavior. Might Ram look at his own behavior to help him determine his thoughts and feelings, just as he might look at the behavior of the others to understand why they act the way that they do. Self-perceptions occurs when we use our own behavior as a guide to help us determine our own thoughts and feelings. We can use the principles of the self-perceptions to help understand how Ram is interpreting his behavior of staying out all the night at the music club rather than studying. When Ram looks at his behavior, he may start to wonder why he is engaged in it. One answer is that the social situation caused the behavior, that it is he might decide that the band he heard last night was so fantastic that he simply had to go hear them and could not possibly have left the music club early. Blaming the situation for the behavior allows him to avoid blaming himself for it and to avoid facing the fact that he found listening to the music more important than his schoolwork. But that the fact that Raman is a bit worried about his unusual behavior suggests that he, at least in a part, might be starting to wonder about his own motivations. Perhaps you have been experiences that the effects of and self-perceptions. Have you ever found yourself becoming more convinced about an argument you are making as you heard yourself making it? Or did you ever realize how thirsty you must have been as you quickly drank a big glass of water? Researchers has shown that the self-perceptions occurs regularly and in many different domains. For instance, if people who were asked to shake their heads up and down rather than sideways while reading the argument favoring or opposing the tuition increases at their school ended up agreeing with the arguments more. And when the people were told by the experimenter to say that the certain cartoons were funny, they ended up actually finding those cartoons funnier. It appears in these cases the people looked at their own behavior. If they moved their heads up and down or said that the cartoon were funny, They figured that they may agree with the arguments unlike the cartoon, creating insufficient justification and over justification. One common finding in social psychology is that the people frequently do not realize the extent to which behavioral is influenced by the social situation. Although this is particularly true for the behavioral of the others, in some cases it may apply to understand our own behavior as well. This means that at least in some cases we may believe that we have chosen to engage in an behavior for the personal reasons, even though external situational factors have actually led us to do it. When the social situation actually causes our behavior, but we do not realize that the social situation was a cause, we call the phenomenon as insufficient justification. Insufficient justification occurs when the threat or reward is actually sufficient to get the person to engage in or to avoid a behavior, but the threat or the reward is insufficient to allow the person to conclude that the situation caused the behavior. Among insufficient justification leads people to like something less because they incorrectly interfere that they did not engage in a behavior due to an internal reasons. It is also possible that the opposite may occur. People may in some cases comes to like a task less when they perceive that they did engage it in an external reason. Over justification occurs when we view our behavior as caused by the situation, leading us to discount the extent to which our behavior was actually caused by our own interest in it. The over justification phenomenon was studied by leading some children to think that they engaged in an activity for a reward rather than because they simply enjoyed it. First, they placed some fun felt tipped marker in the classroom of the children they were studying. The children loved the markers and played with them right away. Then the markers were taken out of a classroom and the children were given a chance to play the markers individually at an experimental sessions with the researcher. At the research session, the children were randomly assigned to one of the three experimental groups. At the research session, the children are randomly assigned to one of the three experimental groups. One group of children, the expected reward condition, was told that if they played with the markers, they would receive a good drawing award. A second group, an unexpected reward condition, also played with the markers and get the reward. But they were not told ahead of a time that they would be receiving the award. It came as a surprise after the session. The third group, that the no reward condition, played with the markers too but got no award. Then the researchers placed the marker black in the classroom and observed how much the children in each of the three groups played with them. The fascinating result was that the children who led to expect a reward for playing with the markers during the experimental session played with the markers less at the session that they had at the first session. Expecting to receive the award, the session has undetermined the initial interest in the markers. Although this might not seem logical at the first, it is exactly what it is expected on the basis of the principles of over justification. When the children has to choose whether to play with the marker when the marker reappeared in the classroom. Although this might not seem logical first, it is exactly what it is expected on the basis of the principle of over justification. When the children has to choose whether to play with the marker when the marker disappeared in the room, they based their decisions on their own prior behavior. The children in the no reward condition group and the children in the unexpected reward condition group realized that they played with a marker because they liked them. Children in the expected award condition group, however, remembered that they were promised a reward for the activity before they played with the markers at last time. These children were most likely to infer that they play with the markers mostly for the external reward, and because they did not infer that they play with the marker mostly for the external reward, and they did not expect to get any reward for playing with the markers in the classroom. They discounted the possibility that they enjoyed playing the marker because they liked them. As a result, they played less frequently with the marker compared with the children in the other groups. This research suggested that although given rewards may in the many classes lead us to perform an activity more frequently or with more effort, a reward may not always increase our liking for the activity. In some cases, rewards may actually make us like an activity less than we did before we were rewarded for it. And this outcome is particularly likely when the reward is provised as an obvious attempt on the part of the others to get us to do something. When the children are given money by their parents to get good grades in the school, they may improve their social performance to gain the reward. But at the same time, their liking for the school may decreases. On the other hand, rewards that are seen or as more internal to the activity, such as the reward that praises us, remind us of our achievements in the domain, and make us feel good about ourselves as a result of our accomplishments, are more likely to be effective in increasing not only the performances of but also the liking of the activity. In short, we use a harsh punishment, we may prevent a behavior from occurring. However, because the person seems that it is the punishment that it is controlling the behavior, the person's attitude may not change. Parents who wish to encourage their children to share their toys, to participate in the piano, therefore would be wise to provide just enough external incentive. Perhaps a constituent remind of an appropriateness of the activity would be enough to enhance the activity. Making a stronger reprimand or the other punishment unnecessarily. Similarly, when we are used extremely positive rewards, we may increase the behavior but at the same time undermine the person's interest in the activity. The problem, of course, is finding the right balance between the reinforcement and over the reinforcement. If we want our child to avoid playing in the street and we provide a harsh punishment for disobeying, we may prevent the behavior but not change the attitude. The child may not play in the street while we are watching but may do some when leave. Providing the less punishment is more likely to lead the children to actually change their his or her beliefs about the approximateness of the behaviors. But the punishment must be enough to prevent the undesired behavior in the first place. The moral is clear. If we want someone to develop a strong attitude, we should use the smallest reward or punishment that it is effective in producing the desired behavior. Experiences of an conjunctive diagnosis can create an attitude change. Let us again take an example of a Ram and imagine that how now we discovered that over the next 2 weeks he had spent virtually every night at the clubs listening to the music ra- studying. And these behaviors are starting to have some severe consequences. He just found out that he had failed his biological midterm. How will he ever explain that to his parents? What were at the first relatively small dispensaries between the self concept and the behavior are starting to snowball, and they are starting to make more effective consciousness. Ram has realized that he is in a big trouble. The inconsistencies between his prior attitudes about the importance of the schoolwork and his behavior are creating some significant threat to his positive self esteem. According to the self awareness theory, this discomfort that occurs when we believe in a way that we see an inconsistent, such as when we fall to live up to our own expectation, is called as conjunctive dissonances. The discomfort of an conjunctive dissonances is experienced as a pain showing up in the part of a brain that it is particularly sensitive to the pain. The anterior cumulative cortex, to demonstrate the extent of which the behaviors that are discrepant from our initial beliefs can create an conjunctive dissonance and can influence the attitude. Feaster, Carl Smith in 1959. College students participated in an experiment in which they were asked to work on a task that was incredibly boring, such as turning the peats on a peak board, and laid it for a full hour. And they had finished the task. The experiment explained that the assistant who normally helped convince people to participate in the study was unavailable and that he could use some help recording the next person that the task was going to be interesting and enjoyable. The experimenter explained that it would be much more convincing if a fellow student than rather than the experimenter delivered his message and asked the participant that if he would be willing to do it. Thus, with his request, the experimenter induced the particular to lie about the task to the another student, and all the participants agreed to do so. The experiment manipulation involved the amount of money the student were paid to tell the lie. Half of a student was offered a large payment of $20 for telling the lie, whereas the another half were offered only a small payment of $1 for telling the lie. After the participant had told the lie, an interviewer asked each of them how much they have enjoyed the task they had performed earlier in the experiment. Feaster and the Carl Smith found that the student who had been paid $20 for saying the task has been enjoyable rated the task was very boring, which indeed it was. In contrast, the students who were paid only $1 for telling the lie changed their attitude towards the task and rated it as significantly more interesting. Feaster explained the results of his study in the terms of inconsistency and inconsistency among the conjunctions. He hypothesized that some thoughts that might be dissonant in the sense that they may made us feel uncomfortable while the other thoughts were more constant. In the sense that they made us feel good, he urged that the people may feel an uncomfortable stage which he called an conjunctive dissonance. When they have many dissonant thoughts, for instance, between the idea that they are smart and decent people, and they nevertheless told a lie to the another person or student for only a small payment. Feaster argued that the people in this experiment who has been induced to lie for only $1 experienced more conjunctive dissonance than the people who were paid $20 because the latter group has strongly external justification for having done it, whereas the former did not. The people in the $1 condition, Feaster argued, needed to convince themselves that the task was actually interesting to reduce the dissonance they were explained. Although originally considered in the terms of an inconsistency among the different conjunction, Feaster's theory had also been applied to the negative feeling that we experiences when there is inconsistency between our attitudes and our behaviors, and particularly when the behavior threatens our perceptions of ourselves as a good people. Thus, Ram is likely feeling conjunctive dissonance because he has acted against his better judgment and those behaviors are having some real consequences for him. This dissonant thoughts involve his perceptions of himself as a hardworking student compared with his recent behavior that do not support that idea. Our expectation is that Ram will not enjoy these negative feelings and will attempt to get rid of them. We reduce dissonance by decreasing the dissonance or by increasing the constant conjunctions. Because wrong perceptions of himself as a hardworking student is now in an geopatry. He is feeling conjunctive dissonance and will naturally try to reduce these negative emotions. He can do so in the number of ways. One possibility is that Ram could simply change his behavior by started to study more and go out of less. If he is successful in doing this, his dissonance will clearly be reduced and he can again feel good about himself. But it seems that he had not been very successful in this regards. Over the past 2 weeks, he had continuously put off studying for listening to music. A second opinion is to attempt to reduce his dissonant conjunctions, those that threaten his self-esteem. Perhaps he might try to convince himself that he was failed only one test and that he didn't expect to do very well in the biology anyway. If he can make the negative behaviors seems less important, dissonance will be reduced. But Rama has a third opinion. Even if he could not change his behavior, and even if he knows that what he was doing has negative consequences, he can create a new constant conjunctions to contradict the dissonant conjunctions. For instance, Ram might try to convince himself that he is going to become an important record producer someday and that it is therefore essential that he attended many concerts. When Ram takes his route, he changes his belief to be more in the line with his behavior. And the outcome is that he has now restored an attitude constancy. His behavior no longer seems as an discrepant from his attitudes as they were before. And when the constituency is restored, diagnosis is reduced. What the principles of the conjunctive dissonance suggested, then it is that we may frequently spend more energy convincing ourselves that we are the good people than we do thinking of ourselves accurately. Of course, we do this because viewing ourselves negatively is painful. Conjunctive dissonance in everyday life. Conjunctive dissonance is an important social psychological principle that can explain how the attitudes follows behavior in many domains of our everyday life. For instance, people who try but fail to quit smoking cigarette naturally suffered lowered self-esteem. But rather than accepting these negative feelings, they frequently attempt to engage in the behavior that reduce the dissonance. They may try to convince themselves that the smoking is not that bad. My grandfather smoked but lived to be 93 years old. I am going to quit next year. Or that may try to add a new concept conjunction. Smoking is fun it relaxes me. You can see that these processes, although making us feel better about ourselves, at least in the short run, may nevertheless have some long term negative outcomes. A person, Aronson and Mills in 1959 studied whether the conjunctive dissonance created by an initiation process could explain how much commitment students felt to a group they were a part of. In their experiments, female college students volunteered to join a group that would be meeting regularly to discuss various aspects of psychology of sex. According to the random assignment, some of the women were told that they would be required to perform an embarrassing procedures before they could join the group. They were asked to read some offensive words and some sexually oriented passages from novel in public, whereas the other women did not have to go through this intention. Then all the women got a chance to listen to the group conversation, which turned out to be very boring. Aaron and Mills found that the women had gone through the embarrassing experiences subsequently reported more likely for the group than those who had not. And Gerard and Matthewson in 1966 found that having to take some electrical shocks as a part of an initiations process that has the same effect. Aronson and Mills argued that the more effect of an individual experiences to become a member of the group, that is, a severe intention, the more he or she is become committed to the group in order to justify the effort put in during the initiation. The idea is that the effort create the dissonant conjunctions. Example, I did all this work to join the group, which are then justifying by creating a more constant one. Example, okay, this group is really pretty fun. The women who spent little effort to get into the group were able to see the group as the dull and the boring conversation that it was. The women who went through the more severe intentions, however, succeed in convincing themselves that the same discussion was a worthwhile experiences. When we put in effort for something, an initiation, a big purchase price, or even some of our precious time, we will likely end up liking the activity more than we would have if the effect has been less. Even the effect of having to fill out a purchase argument for a product rather than having the salesperson to do it for you creates a commitment to purchase and greater likelihood of staying in the idle. Another time you may have experiences the negative affective stages of a conjunctive dissonance is after you have made an important and irrevocable decision. Imagine that you are about to buy a new car and you have narrowed your research to a new small car and a larger but much cheaper used car. The problem is that you can see the advantages and disadvantages to each. For instance, the smaller car would get better gas mileage, but the larger car, because it is used, is cheaper. Imagine, however, that you finally decide to buy the larger car because you feel that you really don't have enough money for the new car. That night, you are lying in a bed and wondering about your decision. Although you enjoyed driving the big car that you have just purchased, you are worried about rising gas cost, that negative impact of a car on the environment, and the possibility that the car might need a lot of repairs. Have you made the right decision? The buyer's remorse can be interpreted in the terms of the post-decisional dissonance, the feeling of regret that may occur after we make an important decision. However, the principles of the dissonance Predict that once you make the decision, and regardless of which the car you chose, you will convince yourself that you made the right choice. Since you have chosen the large car, you will likely begin to think more about the positive aspects of the choice that you have made. What are you going to be able to do with the money you saved, rather than how much more it is going to cost to fill up the gas tank. And at the same time, you will likely downplay the value of the smaller car. Brehm in 1956 posed as a representative of a consumer testing service and asked a woman to rate the attractiveness and desirability of several kinds of applications, such as toasters and electric coffee makers. Each woman was told that as a reward for having participated in the survey, she could have one of the appliances as a gift. She was given a choice between two of the products she had rated as being about equally attractive. After she made her decision, her appliances were wrapped up and given to her. Then 20 minutes later, each woman was asked to re-rate all the products. Brain found that the women rated the appliances that they had chosen and been given as a gift higher than they had the first time. And the women also lowered the rating of the appliances they might have chosen but decided to reject. These results are the course consistent with the principles of conjunctive dissonance. Post-decisional dissonances is reduced by confusing on the positive aspects of the chosen product and the negative aspects of the rejected products. When researchers on the conjunctive dissonance suggested then is that the people who are experiencing the diagnosis will generally try to reduce it. If we fail to lose the weight we wanted to lose, we decide that we look good anyway. If we cheat on an exam, we decide that cheating is okay or common. If we hurt other people's feeling, we may even decide that they are bad people who deserves our negative behavior. To escape from the feeling poorly about themselves, people will engage in a quiet, extraordinarily rationalizing. No wonder that most of us believe the statement, if I had it all to do over again, I would not change anything important. Of course, the tendency to justify our past behavior has positive outcomes for our effects. If we are able to convince ourselves that we can do wrong, we will be happier, at least for today, but the desire to create positive self-esteem can lead to a succession of an self-justification that ultimately results in a chain of an irrational actions. The irony is that to avoid thinking of ourselves as bad, as immoral, we may get ourselves up for the more immoral acts. Once Joshin has convinced himself that his schoolwork is not important, it may be hard to pick it again. Once a smoker has decided it is okay to smoke, she may just keep smoking. If we spend too much time thinking positively about ourselves, we will not learn from our mistakes, nor we will grow or change. In order to learn from our behavior, it would be helpful to learn to tolerate the dissonance long enough to explain the situation critically and dispassionately. We then stand a chance of breaking out of a cycle of an action followed by justification followed by more actions. There is still another potential negative outcomes of an dissonance when we have to make choices we may feel that we have made poor ones. Stewart's in 2004 has argued that having too many choices can create a dissonance and thus the opportunity for the regret. When we go to the store and have to pick only one out of 30 different types of chocolates, we have more opportunities for post decisional dissonance. Although it seems like being allowed to choose would be a good thing, people report being happier when they are given a free gift rather than when they are given a choice between two similar gifts and have to reject one of them. Positive self esteem diagnosis. We have seen that the experiences of an conjunctive diagnosis can influence our thoughts and feelings about an attitude object by making us feel uncomfortable about our own behavior. The discrepant behavior causes our sense of an self worth to be lowered, which then causes us to change our attitudes to feel better about ourselves. Discrepant behavior, lowered self worth, changes in the thoughts and feeling. Imagine that immediately after you did something dishonest, but before you had a chance to try to reduce the dissonance you were experiencing, you were able to remind yourself of the fact that you had recently done something else very positive. Perhaps you had recently spent some time volunteering at the homeless shelter or gotten a really high score on an important exam. Would that possibility of boosting your self esteem is this other but unrelated domain make it unnecessary for you to engage in the dissonance reduction? Could you say that, well, it is true that I cheated, but I am really a fine, intelligent, and general person? Research has demonstrated that this is the case if we can affirm of our self-worth even on the dimensions that are not related to the source of an original dissonance. The negative feelings were experiences or reduced, and so it is the tendency to justify our attitudes. Just as finding a way to affirm our self-esteem should reduce in conjunctive dissonance, threat to our self-esteem should increase it. Because conjunctive dissonance possesses a threat to one's self-esteem, people who are more motivated by the self-concern should show bigger changes in their thoughts and feelings after they engage in an discriminant behavior that showed those who are less motivated by the self-concern. Following the researches of An Braham in 1956, Heath and Leham in 1997 conducted an experiment to determine if threats of an self-esteem would increase the magnitude of the dissonance reduction effect and if the dissonance reduction would also occur for Japanese students as they have previously been founded in the students from the Western samples. They expect that there would be a less need for the diagnosis reaction in the Japanese than in the Western students because the Japanese and the other Easterners were less motivated overall to maintain a positive self-image. In their studies, 71 Canadian and 71 Japanese participants were first asked to take a personality test. According to the random assignments to the condition, one-third of a sample in each country were led to believe that they had scored the much higher on the test that did the other participants and thus they had the positive personalities, the positive feedback conditions. Another third of a sample, the negative feedback condition, were led to believe that they had scored more poorly on the test than the average. And the final third, the control conditions, were not given any feedback on their personality test scores. Then all the participants rated the disk reliability of the 10 component disk, which were known to be popular in both Canada and the Japan, and were asked to choose between their fifth and the sixth rated CDs as the compensation for their participation. Finally, after choosing one of the CDs, the participants were asked to gain rate their liking for the CDs. The chance in the rating from before choices to after choices, which would have occurred if the participant increased their liking of a CDs they had chosen or decreased their liking of a CDs they had rejected, was the dependent measures in the study. The researchers found a significant interactions between the culture and personality feedback. The pattern often beings showed that the feedback mattered for the Canadian participants. The difference in the stage rate of the chosen versus the rejected CDs, the spread of an alternatives, increased from the positive to the control to the negative feedback condition. However, there was no significant sample effects of a feedback for the Japanese students, nor did they show a significant strength of an alternatives in any feedback conditions. However, the other researchers had found that the individuals from their collectiveness cultures do show the dissonance effects when they are focused on their relationship with others. For instance, Kitama, Snibi, Marcus, and Suzuki in 2004 found that the East Asian participant experiences the diagnosis, particularly when they were asked to think about a close friend who had made a dissonant creating decision. Such a result would be expected because behaviors that involve more other oriented collective outcomes should be more important for those people. Indeed, research has found that the advertisement that are framed in the terms of personal benefits, example, use this breath meant, or more precursive in individualistic cultures, whereas ads that empathizes the family or in a group benefits, example, share this breath meant with your friends, are more preservative in collecting the cultures. Although dissonance is mostly likely when a behavior violates our positive self-concept, attitude changes can occur whenever our thoughts and the behaviors are inconstant, even if the self-constant is not involved. For instance, Harold Jones and his colleagues had people drink up an unpleasant tasting beverages, that is the coal aided made with a vinegar instead of sugar, and then write down on a small slip of a paper which they had immediately crumbled up and threw away, a statement saying that they really liked the drink. Harmon Jones and his colleagues found that even though the lie could not possibly harm anyone, the act of lying nevertheless made the participants express more positive and attitudes toward the drink. It appears that even lying to oneself about something relatively unimportant can produce a dissonance and change the attitudes. Salespersons make use of an psychological principles including the self-perception and conjunctive dissonance to encourage people to buy their products, often in a way that seems less than completely open and ethical. Inform consumers are aware of such techniques including the foot in the door techniques, the low ball techniques, and the bait and the switch. As prescribed by the principles of the attitude constituency, if we engage in an unexpected or unusual behaviors, our thoughts and feelings toward the behaviors are likely to change. Self-perceptions occurs when we use our own behavior as a guide to help us determine our thoughts and feelings. Self-preservations can lead us to neither insufficient justification, the perception that there was not enough extended threats to avoid engaging in an behavior or over justification, the perception that our behavior was caused primarily by external factors. Principles of self perception suggested that to create a true attitude changes, we should avoid using too much punishment or too much reward. Conjunctive dissonance refers to the discomfort that occurs when we behave in a way that we see as inappropriate, such as when we fail to live up to our own expectations. Dissonance is reduced by changing the behavior, by reducing the dissonant conditions, or by creating a new constant conjunctions to counteract the discontent conjunction. Dissonance is observed in many everyday experiences, including the limitations and the experiences of the post decisional diagnosis. Engaging in diagnosis reducing has a many positive outcomes for our effect but may lead to harmful self-justification and irrational actions because dissonance involves self-concern. It is stronger when we do not feel very positively about ourselves, or maybe stronger in the Western than in Eastern culture. Markets use the principles of the diagnosis in their attempts at the precautions. Examples are the foot in the door techniques, low bowling, and the bait and switch technique. Self perceptions. It is a theory which describes a people knows their attitude by understanding and interpreting their own behavior. Conjunctive dissonance. It is an internal stage which occurs where there is an inconsistent between one attitude and the other attitude or behavior. Post-decisional dissonance. The feeling of a regret that may occur after we make an important decision. Foot in the door techniques. It compliances the tactist where a small request is asked to be a person first, which follows with a larger request later. Belts and switches. It is an advertising techniques where a bargain prices item is used to attract a customer, then they are encouraged to buy a more expensive similar items. Lowball technique. It is a selling technique where a service or a product is offered at a low price initially to attract a customer, then increase the price. Thank you.